You are listening to Small Business Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives small business owners the straight talk on productivity, time management, business systems, leading your teams, strategic decision-making, and mindset. No BS, fluff, or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the productivity specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Small Business Straight Talk podcast. Today is episode 381, ADHD Strategies for Neurodivergent Small Business Owners with Skye Waterson. If you're a small business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve time management, and elevate productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time for what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. I'm looking forward to you meeting our guest, Skye Waterson. Skye is an ADHD strategist, coach, and founder of Unconventional Organization. She helps entrepreneurs and executives stay focused, build consistent revenue, and scale without burnout. With a following of over 82,000 engaged professionals, she shares ADHD-friendly strategies for sustainable success. After being diagnosed with ADHD during her PhD, Skye realizes that traditional productivity advice didn't work for her. She went on to develop ADHD-friendly strategies that help entrepreneurs and executives cut through the distractions, stay consistent, and lead with confidence without burning out. Her mission is to take the guesswork out of managing ADHD so entrepreneurs can focus on what actually moves the needle. Before we dive into this conversation with Skye, I want to invite you to take my Next Level Business Owner quiz. If you have not yet done so, take 3 short minutes to take this quiz and find out what's most holding you back from taking your business to the next level. I'll send you a curated playlist of specific episodes that address those pain points so that you can take action immediately and see the results in your business. Head on over to amberdelagarza.com/quiz. Again, hit pause, head on over to amberdelagarza.com/quiz. And now let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome to the podcast, Skye. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I am looking forward to this conversation. I think so many of our listeners are going to, resonate with what you're going to share with us and also walk away with some real actionable strategies. Before we dive into all those amazing strategies, I would love to hear your story of why are you working in the field of ADHD? I know a little bit of it. I don't think our listeners do. And I want to just hear that journey as to why this is your life's work now.
Yeah. So not something I expected to be doing. I was sort of a lifelong academic. I was studying my master's and then I got a PhD scholarship. So I started doing one of those. And when I was starting my PhD, I thought to myself, I really need to figure out if something is wrong. I was having what I would call a spiky profile. Some days were great, some days were not so great. So I went to my inclusive learning center and they tested me for a couple of days, couple of hours, doing a whole bunch of random tests for what I had. And at the end, they said, look, we're pretty confident you have ADHD. You need to go get tested for it. And that was the first time I really learned about adult ADHD. I taught psychology. I knew about it in kids, but the adult part at the time was really, really new. And it really threw me into a different research path.
So when you were diagnosed or prior to, you didn't suspect it because you thought either you're diagnosed as a child or you're not? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I knew I was like maybe a bit different, but I was an academic. We're all a bit different, I was like sort of like, it's just the way it is. I thought maybe I had dyslexia. There was some issues with spelling and grammar and things like that, but it turned out that was mostly to do with just writing really fast and getting kind of bored of what I was writing. And so, really the ADHD side was there. Looking back, it's 100% obvious that I had ADHD, but just at the time, it just wasn't discussed in adults.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you that. Like looking back now through the lens of being diagnosed,
Mm-hmm.
did you
Oh,
know that
yeah.
you always had it? I find that I've spoken with many people with ADHD, and what I've heard is that undiagnosed, you figure out how to navigate the world and the work,
Mm-hmm.
and you find your
Mm-hmm.
own things. And to your point, kind of chalking it off as it's just unique things to me, or
Mm-hmm.
um, it's not a big deal because look, many people with ADHD are very successful, and so not a big
Mm-hmm.
deal. But the truth is that you undiagnosed, or maybe you don't know to go look for other tools that can make life easier for you. And that was my hope
Yeah.
for today, is for anyone listening, whether you have ADHD, you're diagnosed, self-diagnosed, not diagnosed, and have some of these tendencies, maybe you walk away from today's episode with tools that make life easier for you to navigate.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's now for me, that is my mission, is to help other people with exactly that.
So how quick was the pivot? So you get diagnosed, you're working on your PhD. What happens with this new
Yeah, right. You're like, how
information?
did you
Yeah.
get here? It was not a quick pivot at all. Basically, I'm an academic, so I had been teaching in the university for many years at that point. Across a bunch of different departmental topics. But I started a community for postgrads who were neurodiverse like me. I just wanted to talk to people who had my
Yeah.
brain. And then from there, I started researching it. Obviously, I had access to a lot of the academic journals, primary research. I was very lucky in that way. And then I ended up working in schools, kind of supporting, I just couldn't get enough. Like I'd found the thing I wanted to research. And so I started working in schools, and that was around about when COVID hit. And I was looking for, something to do to keep teaching, young adults or adults in general. And I found ADHD coaching, and I tried it and I loved it. And I took everything online. I started coaching online, and I also started writing articles and putting them on my website. And they had references from academic, spaces, because that's what I did. And those really took off. And that really brought a lot of attention that developed into the business that I have now, where I help business owners and executives with ADHD specifically support their growth.
Incredible. So I would like to just first dive into, well, can you explain what executive function is and the intersection between that and ADHD, and what are the typical challenges with executive function and ADHD?
Yeah. So ADHD is a persistent and pervasive struggle with a couple of different areas. We do see shifts in the brain because sometimes people don't realize it's kind of having that real functional difference, and it can be struggles with impulsivity, feeling driven by a motor, getting very easily distracted, and then you can struggle with executive functioning issues as part of that, including time blindness, working memory struggles, set switching, transition times, etc. And this is all something that you get a diagnosis from the DSM. So somebody, goes through the DSM questions, will ask you those questions, and will assess what you have. The executive functioning part is interesting because you don't have to have ADHD to have executive functioning difficulties. I particularly work with people who have ADHD, but those difficulties, there is no totally agreed upon definition of executive functioning. It's a very complicated area.
Yes. So just to repeat what I heard, you can have challenges with executive functioning and not be ADHD.
Yep.
Is it true that you can have ADHD and not have challenges with executive functioning?
So I would say it depends. So sometimes I will work with people who say, oh, time blindness is not actually a struggle that I have, but they have enough other struggles that they meet the criteria according to the DSM. So can you have no executive functioning struggles? I mean, I don't think so. I'm trying to remember the
Yeah.
questions. But you can definitely struggle with a specific slice of it and not another.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. My business, I teach time management and productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Many of my clients, it's a skill set that, has not been taught, or their habits and behaviors that
Oh,
have
yeah.
not been exercised. And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily ever mean ADHD, although it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
exclude that. But the truth is that much of what we're talking about here is not taught in schools. You're not taught how to manage your time. You're not. There's so many of
Mm-hmm.
these things that it's almost like, okay, you're an adult, like you should just know these things, and that's not
Yeah.
always
And
absolutely not the case.
exactly. And sometimes the advice that you're given will totally work for some people. They get handed a very small calendar planner and, a daily block time system. And they're like, this is it. I'm great. I'm good to go. But for a lot of us, our brains just work differently and we need different systems.
Yeah, I mean, that's the basis of my work in the last 15 years is
Mm-hmm.
like you, I found this passion with time management and productivity, and I delved
Mm-hmm.
deep into it, and I was reading all the books and, you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
learning all about it. And what I didn't like is that I would go from this book or this article, and it was being mostly taught through the lens of, here's the magic pill, do this, one, two, three,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to fix X problem. And I have learned that there are fundamental strategies, but then how they're applied and they're changed and they look different, and you experiment to find and honor what works for you. Because so many people have been left trying to improve their executive functioning skills and get left with, there's something wrong with me because those instructions that are very narrow in that book with that recommendation
Mm-hmm.
didn't work for me.
Yeah.
What's wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And I always say I'm app agnostic because I feel like people are always like asking me like, what's the perfect app and what's the perfect system? What I tend to do, and this is something that maybe is a bit unique, is I have a researcher on my team and we meet, once a week and we go through the latest academic research into, neuroscience and dopamine systems and that kind of thing. And those systems that we research, and sometimes we have to sort of pore over the academic articles to pull out the stuff that's actually going to be helpful because they don't always write it for us. That becomes the basis of what is then tested, that becomes part of the systems that I teach. And so that for me has always been a really great way to kind of hold on to a system that will really work for people rather than getting lost in tips and tricks, which I know a lot of people complain about. They're like, I don't want another tip. Please don't give me another tip.
Yeah. Yeah. You just shared that some of the research that you pour over is about dopamine. Can you tell us the connection and why that's important for you?
Yeah, so with ADHD, a lot of it has to do with how we process dopamine. So, for example, there is a paper, and so a lot of the stuff is still theoretical, and neuroscientists are still arguing. But we do know there are really strong differences in how our brain functions. For example, I'm such a fan of Tripp and Wickens and their work because they developed the dopamine transfer deficit theory, which essentially a way of explaining it is if you're neurotypical and you start a task, so if you don't have ADHD, your brain gives you a big thumbs up and says, hey, you're going to get a reward later. That's awesome. You're doing a task. You feel good. If you have ADHD and you start a task, your brain looks at you and goes, what are we doing? This is boring. I don't want to do this. And so
Yeah.
that allowed, like, understanding that information allowed me to realize and then start testing and then start teaching a system where you give yourself a specific kind of reward for starting a task. It's not just chocolate, although we love our chocolate, but kinds of sensory boosts that are going to help you sit down and get something that is missing from how your brain functions.
All right. So if you give it to them before,
Mhm.
this is actually incredibly, I'm curious. I'm thinking of
Mhm.
just how I raised my child, right? Is do the thing, you get the reward. And I get
Mhm.
that might not work for everybody. So we
Mhm.
we reverse this. We get the reward,
Mhm.
how often does the task get finished if we were already rewarded? Or are we
So
getting one? Are we bookending the rewards? We get one at the beginning and at the end.
yeah, this is a good question. So basically how it works, I have a whole system. It's called the Step Into Focus routine. Basically how this works is you sit down in the space you're going to do the task. And yes, if you're going to clean your closet, this means you sit down on the floor next to your closet. So you sit down in the space you're going to do the task, ready to do the task. And give yourself a reward that is short, that has a natural end point that you can do right at the beginning of the task. So for a lot of people, they'll sit down at their desk, they'll have a smoothie, they'll have, maybe a snack, and they might read an article, something that they can stop. And this kind of just gets them to the part where they're sitting at their desk. And then from there, what we do is we go, okay, now turn off distractions. This is a good time to turn off any distractions. You're feeling pretty good. And then we talk about dialing down your dopamine. We don't turn it off because then you just feel bad. We dial it down. We say, okay, well, let's switch to a podcast, or let's switch to some music. Let's take a minute and let's write down on a little piece of paper everything that you are going to do during this period of time to support your working memory, bringing in that executive functioning struggle. And then from there, we say, okay, well, let's just open the application you're going to use, tinker around, make some notes. And then at that point, you know what you're doing. You've gotten your dopamine boost. You're actually sitting down. You're listening to some music, and you've already opened the application. It's very, very easy to start. So we kind of teach you how to step into focus using what I've learned from neuroscience and all the research, things like that.
I have always described myself as a car that needs warming up. So we know, eat the frog, do the most important thing at the first of the day. This is the book I'm talking about. And as a productivity and time management specialist, people are shocked that I'm not telling them that the very first thing they should do when they sit down at their desk is deep work. And that's just from my own experience, is that no, actually I need to recognize I want to sit down. I want to settle in. I want to get some quick dopamine hits, like quick tasks off. And then I ride that momentum of getting some quick wins. It's a dopamine hit, but with a start time of the deep work. So it's not like I'm just going to like open-endedly warm my car up in this example. I have a routine that allows me to step into that focus, and then I do it. By putting deep work at the front of my day, well, that just is discouraging because that's not actually what I'm going to do. That's not actually the way that I can show up best. And so I did not have the research for that. It was just me watching and listening to how I work best and honoring that without judgment.
Yeah, and I think honoring exactly how you work best, to your point, is so important. Knowing when you have the energy to do things, understanding, your time, when you're likely to get things done the most. Like, we want to set ourselves up for success.
Yeah. I also teach energy management in the sense that we want to be aware of when we have higher energy and lower energy. I'm curious for you. Where is that line, or how do you teach somebody that we can't always lean into how we feel because that's emotion-based and could sabotage our success in showing up, but also teetering on acknowledging that it takes certain energy to do certain types of tasks?
Yeah, that's a great question because I work with people who have ADHD or ADHD-ish, which is what we say when you're not sure. And there's a lot of emotional regulation stuff to do with it. We know this from the research. So when we're working around that, usually what I ask people to do is to get curious and understand why they're resisting. If you're somebody who just doesn't want to do something right now, like, what is going on? Because it's usually one of three things. It's usually that it is too boring, that it is too confusing, or that it is emotionally salient. The last time you did it, something bad happens, it's got rejection attached to it, that kind of thing. Those three pieces, they have specific strategies that you can use to overcome them. And so then what we do is we, again, give yourself a reward for starting. I love a reward for starting. I have a whole system in, sensory supports. and work through those strategies and make that maybe the thing you do rather than the task, and the task comes later.
Yeah. Can you run through those three? Let's just take boredom. If I have the thought that a task or activity is boring, what do you do with that? Like, are you trying to change the thought that it's not boring, right? Like,
No.
okay, maybe I can make this fun. Or are we like, what are the tools to do the thing that is boring? Because I'm sure in your work and with your clients, but like there's a lot of boring stuff
A
in
lot of
business
boring
that
stuff.
has to be done to be
Yep.
successful. So how do you push through acknowledging that there's resistance when it's boring, but also push through to get to the other side?
Yeah. It's interesting you should say that. So we don't push through. That, I think that's the first thing to say. There, when it's boring, I ask people to acknowledge that it's boring. We don't try and say it's not boring or anything like that. It doesn't work. And I work with 6 and 7 figure business owners, and you're like, so this would make you $100,000, and they're like, I know, it doesn't make a difference. So that's kind of the fun and complexity of working with ADHD people. And so what we do instead, if it's boring, is I go, okay, how can we make this more fun? Like, that's the number one thing that we're looking at. So, gosh, what have I done with clients? It's interesting. It ranges from anything to sometimes this person thinks they know what a reward is and they do not. Like, they're like, well, I tried coffee. And you're like, okay, that's like level 1 reward. Like, what else are we doing here? Do you want to go to a coffee shop? Maybe a nice one. Like, we could try that. And it's funny. Sometimes that will do it. I've had people go get sushi, things like that. Sometimes it is that final push. We can really struggle with the last 10% of something. And so sometimes we have to do a big thing. I've done something called like a dopamine party before with clients who are in that final stretch of a project where they will like work with somebody else, because body doubling can be very helpful in that way. You've got somebody else to kind of like follow along with you. And they will like make that day the day they're going to solve this problem. They're going to kind of like bring in everything. So when I talk sensory, I talk, taste, touch, smell, sight. Where are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? What are you going to be sitting on? What are you going to be listening to? What are you going to be eating and drinking? And like all of those things make everything that's not the task as interesting as possible. And then in terms of making the task as interesting as possible, usually we will shift the format that you're doing it in. So we'll adjust it. So we might say, can we put this on paper for this final piece? Can we print it out? Can we, visualize it in a different way? Can we do it on your iPad? Like, we'll try and find some way of bringing, as much as possible to the task itself. When you put all of those pieces together, I've seen people finish tasks that they have been putting off for years. In fact, that's like the number one thing people say when they start working with me is they start finishing things that they've been putting off for years.
And when you're having these rewards, do you work with them to create like a bank of rewards? Because it seems like there's a lot of mental bandwidth to come up with rewards. So it seems efficient that if you kind of explore, like, what's the bank of them so I can plug and play them throughout my day to create more flow and, move me through.
Yeah, I do get people to write a list 100%. Luckily, creative problem solving, this is not necessarily a struggle with ADHD. So I usually just remind people this is something that they're good at, ask them to come up with a bank. Also, as part of the community, you can always ask other people who've been there for a while. They have tried and true methods that they can share. And so people will also sort of trade tips and ideas of what has worked for them.
Does the level of what it takes to get that dopamine hit change over time? So do you get like, okay, this thing worked and it worked, maybe it worked a year, maybe it worked 2 years, and then suddenly it's going to take extra more, reward to get that same dopamine experience?
Yeah, I would say that it definitely does change over time. Not so much more. It's not kind of in that same way because you're not hitting the exact same thing. You're looking at all senses, and different tasks have different needs as well. So usually what will happen is people will have to do a sidestep. So maybe they like to read comics and then articles worked better, but now they're like watching a video. And especially, one of the cool things that happens when I see people do this over time is their brains will start to trust them. If you live in a world where things don't suck that much that often, which is kind of what we're trying to build, because with ADHD we need that, otherwise we're not going to do it. If we didn't, no one comes to me if they can kind of just push through things, you know what I mean? Like they don't need this. Then what will happen, generally speaking, is your brain will usually start to trust you, which is a weird thing to say, but usually if you've tried to white knuckle, if you've pushed yourself to burn out a lot, you're in a position where as soon as you start something, not only do you have that dopamine dip because you don't have the same kind of brain, but also you have all that times that it sucked and it was horrible and I barely got through it and I don't know how I'm going to do it again. And so that can make it really difficult. Once you've started to do things in a way that is fun, that doesn't feel bad, that you're actually getting things done, you will be able to, step in without as much anxiety. And sometimes people actually need less than what they needed when they started because they start to trust themselves.
Yeah. Do you use the strategy of delegation? So if you're working with leaders and business owners, at some point, if we can hire somebody or we can train somebody on the team to do the thing that there's so much resistance to, is it more leverageable to outsource that, delegate that? Or maybe pieces of it, maybe the pieces that you're most stuck at, and then you can come in and do the fun part of that activity or task. Is that something that you recommend? And do you have success with that?
100%. 100%. It's like kind of one of the second pillars of what I teach. I teach people how to focus, which is a lot of what we talked about. And then from there, I teach them how to get their time back because, we want to grow. You're not going to get from 6 to 7 figures or, get to your first 6 figures without hiring people, without bringing people on to take your time back on certain tasks. But you are correct. A lot of times I'll work with people and they will have given away their most fun tasks to somebody else. I don't know why we do this, but it's like we think like, well, I have to do this really boring one. Sometimes we don't want to show people, what it looks like because it's such a mess. And so I have systems that I teach to help you specifically bring on people that are going to support you in the way you work and then handle tasks in a way that's not going to be incredibly boring, incredibly draining, because that can be a lot. People will say, "Oh, I hired an assistant. It was way more work in the end than I expected. It actually took time away from what I was doing." I hear that all the time.
Yeah. So and when you hear that, the reasoning is what? Because they're not aligning the right tasks or?
It's a combination. Sometimes they just hired the wrong person. Like people will do this all the time. They'll say, "Oh, I just hired somebody I was recommended and I didn't really check. I just kind of grabbed somebody." That happens all the time. Yeah. But let's say you hire a good person, it's still not working. Usually it's because sometimes people won't even get to the part where they offload tasks. I've seen people just keep somebody on and never really give them a task because they're like, "Well, I'd have to sit down and I'd have to write down exactly what I do. And I don't want to do that." And so it never gets to them. So, we talk about how to actually offload tasks in that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch gears and talk about the ideal physical environment. And maybe it doesn't just sit with physical, digital, what other elements to help someone that has ADHD focus.
The ideal physical environment is interesting. It's different for everyone with ADHD, and it will be different based on your tasks as well. So the number one thing that I recommend is figuring out what your optimal level of dopamine stimulation is for doing a certain task. Some people will need quiet. Some people will need noise. Figuring out what yours is and then figuring out how to create an environment that works. So for me personally, I have 2 screens. It supports working memory. I can switch between both. I have a view. I like to look out the window. That's, I like a lot of sunlight. And I like to have, music on. That's kind of my zone. And also, surprise, people don't know this, but my office has glass windows around it. And I particularly chose to work in a space like this because I have two small children and I can see, in the rest of the house what's going on, which is really nice. As a mom, I don't feel like trapped in my office. So this is my personal environment. This is going to 100% not work for everybody all the time. It doesn't even work for me all the time in different spaces. So my biggest thing for you is to experiment. And again, when you find yourself not wanting to go to your office, the answer is not, I just push through and go to my office. The answer is like, how can we adjust your office to be somewhere you want to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I can just say that my work over the last 15 years echoes that same real life examples. I have a framework
Mm-hmm.
called the Freedom to Focus framework. And essentially, it's a whole questionnaire. It's like 4 pages and it talks about all kinds of things: the temperature, indoor, outdoor, dark, the noise, the temperature, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's just a questionnaire to get people to think back to, well, what was most ideal about their environment when they showed up their
Mm-hmm.
best?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you go through all that, your job is to do that on purpose and
Mm-hmm.
not to judge it.
Yeah.
I've shared a lot of examples over the years on the podcast, with myself included, but many clients, that it's not that we don't know what actually allows us to show up our best. What I find is there's often judgment around it. And so we resist it and we don't lean into it. Do you find that with your clients, they have an idea of what their best work environment is, but they resist it because there's judgment? I'll give you an
Yes.
example. Let's just say someone works best with the TV on in the
Mm-hmm.
background, white noise, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm in a corporate office. That's so unprofessional. Like, what? I can't have the
Yeah.
TV on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that they're watching the TV. And why they don't
Yes.
do it is because of
Yeah.
the perceptions of
Mm-hmm.
that being
Mm-hmm.
unprofessional.
Yeah, 100%. One of the biggest struggles people have at the beginning working with me is once we work through how to prioritize your tasks, how to make decisions, how to focus, a lot of the maintaining these systems involves dopamine support. It involves making an environment that's good, giving yourself a reward for starting, making sure that you're stimulated enough to want to continue to do this. I mean, running your own business is pretty voluntary. If you hate it, eventually you are going to quit. And
Yeah.
so this is something that, I have people struggle with a lot. And one of the reasons I love running a community is that people will get to talk to other entrepreneurs. And that has helped a lot. People will start to see that people that they look up to and admire, are actually doing this in a fun way, and it's okay.
It is so okay. I want everyone to hear that it's completely okay.
Mm-hmm.
My belief is that our job and our only job is to just show up and do our best, and
Mm-hmm.
that and what it takes to do that, because we all just want to do our best and contribute to our companies and our team, is going to look different. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's not a bad goal. The goal is to show up our best selves.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, definitely. I think doing your best and understanding that it's not, one of the things I say to people with ADHD a lot is you're probably working as hard as you possibly can right now. So the alternative solution is not to just try and work harder. That is just how you burn out. It's to work in a way that works for your brain. So trying your
Absolutely.
best in a way that works for your brain is really impactful, and it can change a lot of people's lives, and that's one of the reasons I love doing it.
Absolutely. I have a question. This may not be your area of expertise. I know you lean heavily into the research, so you can decline if
Mhm.
you don't know. Is there any research about what we eat or supplements that help with the dopamine, that help with ADHD, or anything like that?
Oh, that is a great question. The answer is that there is. There is a lot of research into it, into gut health and supplementation, and there are experts in how to do them. I am not one of those experts. Nutritional
Yeah,
science is a whole different ball game. So I will decline to sorry, I will defer to those experts. What I will say is that in terms of energy, one of the things we know is that movement can be really helpful for working memory. So if you're somebody who needs a boost in working memory, movement can be really helpful. And obviously, getting a lot of sleep is very difficult for people with ADHD. We have, a lot sleep disorders, things going around, but it can really help with executive functioning. And then obviously feeding yourself well, the best you can is helpful. So the basics are helpful, but in terms of specific supplementation, that is not my area of expertise.
Yeah, and not mine either. And the reason I asked is because I had gone through my own 2-year journey of
Mhm.
gut health repair and
Mhm.
my own research just from my own experience and learning so much about it being, referred to as your second brain and how it affects
Mhm.
dopamine and all of these things, which I found incredibly interesting. And so I would just say that if this question interested you, go do your own research. There's probably so
There
much
are
out
experts
there.
out there.
Yeah, there
There
are
are
experts.
experts out there. Yeah.
We'll just bring the topic up. We are not the two experts, but I did find, I think skill set, exploring what works
Mhm.
best and how. What I heard you saying over and over, and this is my own words, was that as a coach, you help people better understand their brains.
Yeah.
And what a gift. Then once they understand their brain, then they're getting given permission to experiment
Mhm.
with a whole bunch of strategies that could
Yeah.
potentially help them and building a community because one of the biggest, I don't know if it's a challenge, but realities is that many people feel very alone. Entrepreneurship period is can be a very
Mhm.
lonely experience.
Mhm.
Then you add on thoughts like I'm different, I do things different, I see the world different, I experience the world different. It can be very isolating.
Yeah, 100%. And I used to do one-on-ones only. And I switched now. Have very few one-on-ones, mostly with seven-figure business owners, and I work with the community of people who kind of want to be in that, 5 and 6 figure space. And what I found is that the connection that people will have when they meet someone else who has the same brain as them and is on the same path as them and is struggling with the same things as them, you cannot replicate that. I cannot give that to you because I can tell you things. I can be the expert, but people will always say, "Oh, Skye, you've probably figured it out. You know what you're doing," which is 100% not
Yeah.
true. I use
Right,
all of these
right.
strategies. But it's like when you just see people connect and honestly just be like, okay, Skye, enough talking. Like, I just want to talk to this other person, which is amazing. I
Yeah.
love, the connection in the community. And that confidence, it's just so amazing to see.
That's incredible. Do you have any strategies you want to close out with that can generally help someone listen to this episode and start implementing or experimenting to
Hmm.
implement what ultimately works for them? If they're like, hey, I am ADHD, I think I'm ADHD, but I just want some tangible strategies I can,
Yeah.
implement right now in my day to day.
Hmm. Yes, I have one. It's called the ADHD Focus Filter. I give this one away for free, so you can just go on my website, ADHD Focus Filter. You can find it there. I'm sure you guys will link it, but I give it away for free right at the beginning, even though it's technically not free. Is because I want people to go from overwhelmed to focused immediately in their lives. Like, we should not have to wander around feeling super overwhelmed, starting the day not knowing what to do next, feeling paralyzed, just checking email again and again and again. And I know that so many of us get stuck doing that. And so I've developed a process, again, based on the research, that will allow you to break down and filter what you need to do so that you will be able to understand what is urgent for sure, but mostly what is important, what needs to be done, and what's actually going to move the needle, and how to bring that into your day and actually do it.
Incredible. We'll be sure to link out to that in the show notes as well. Skye, thank you so much for being here. And it was so great to just talk to you about this common challenge that so many have and that you've done research, you have resources for them. So thank you so much.
No worries. It was great to be here.
I have loved having you listen to this episode of the Small Business Straight Talk podcast. And I sure hope you found my conversation with Skye to be valuable. I do know that she shared a lot of great actionable strategies that you can implement immediately. I need to be straight with you. No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. If you are thinking of hiring a business coach, now is the time that we should be talking. Don't wait. I'm inviting you to have just a conversation, but it's a conversation that potentially will get you on the quickest path to improving your time management and elevating your productivity so that you can be a better business owner and enjoy your success. Head on over to amberdelagarza.com/coaching to learn more and schedule a call today. And if you are new here, I just want to say welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And if you've enjoyed this conversation with Skye, be sure to share it with another business owner who you think would find it valuable. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.